All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to peel back the layers of the massively complex, absolutely fascinating, and honestly, sometimes pretty shocking world of bodybuilding. We are going on a real journey today. We're going to start with that everyday advice you hear the literal second you step onto a gym floor. Then we'll move through the hard science of human genetics, scale the totally impossible peaks of the mass monsters, and finally, we'll descend into the darkest, unseen realities of the sport. It is a massive ecosystem, and I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to see the fitness world in a completely different light. So think of our roadmap today kind of like an iceberg. We're starting right at the surface with Section 1, shattering gym myths. Then, just below that, Section 2, the genetic blueprint. Plunging deeper, Section 3, era of the mass monsters. And finally, way down at the darkest depths, Section 4, scandals and tragedies. Let's get to it. Section 1. Shattering gym myths. Bro science versus clinical reality. Okay, we're kicking things off by completely busting those common myths beginners are fed from day one. There's just this sheer contrast between what people believe and what clinical reality actually proves. You know the drill. People say use light weights for toning or do thousands of crunches to burn that stubborn belly fat. But here's the science. Muscle doesn't actually have a toning mode. It literally doesn't know if you're doing 5 reps or 30. What it responds to is mechanical tension. As long as you're training close to failure, the muscle is going to grow. And as for spot-reducing fat with crunches, complete fiction. The fat cell sitting above your abs has absolutely zero direct relationship with the muscle contracting underneath it. Your genetics dictate where the fat burns from, not your workout app. And then there's this massive fear of the barbell. We're always told that heavy weights are going to break us, right? So we just stick to the 30-pound dumbbells to be safe. But science actually shows us that progressive strength training reduces your injury risk in sports by up to 50%. It builds bone density, it reinforces joint stability. It's a real game changer. It isn't the heavy weight that hurts you, it's ego lifting without technique. Bad form is going to hurt you at any weight. The barbell itself, it's entirely neutral. Now, what about the pump? We all chase the pump, we chase that deep soreness, but look, the pump is just temporary fluid. It literally disappears in hours and leaves zero structural change behind. And soreness, well, that's just a sign of novelty and mechanical damage. It doesn't automatically mean productive growth. Plus, more volume isn't always better. The athletes training the most aren't always growing the most. Past a certain point, they're just accumulating recovery debt. Finding that minimum effective dose is absolutely key. Oh, and contrary to the whole cardio kills gains myth, moderate cardio 2 to 3 times a week actually improves nutrient delivery and speeds up your recovery. So understanding how your body recovers is crucial, which brings us to this massive number, 48. For decades, guys have been frantically choking down protein shakes in the gym parking lot because of this mythical 30-minute anabolic window. Like, if you missed it, your whole workout was just wasted. The actual truth? Muscle protein synthesis continues for up to 48 hours after you leave the gym. Having a shake right after doesn't hurt, sure, but missing it by an hour isn't costing you a single gram of muscle. So stop watching the clock and just start counting your total daily protein. Which brings us to Section 2, the genetic blueprint. Biology overrides effort. We are transitioning now from gym habits to the hard biological realities. Think of your body kind of like an architectural blueprint that was drawn up long before you ever even touched a weight. And central to this blueprint is your muscle insertion. This is the exact genetic point where a muscle tendon attaches to a bone. Now, why does this matter so much? Because it completely determines a muscle's maximum potential length, its visual shape, and the absolute ceiling for its development. You can train with perfect intensity for a whole decade, but effort just cannot override your DNA. When you break down the genetic lottery, you see these massive differences. Take the biceps, for example. A high, short insertion means the muscle bunches up really tight when it's flexed. This is exactly what gave Arnold Schwarzenegger his crazy mountain-like peak. But if you have a low insertion, your arm looks fuller when relaxed, but you'll literally never build that sharp mountain shape. Look at the lats. A low insertion creates that dramatic sweeping V-taper down the back, while a high insertion looks way more compact. And then we have the calves, probably the cruelest muscle in the entire body. If your calf muscle inserts high up near the knee, there's a visible gap down to the ankle, and no amount of calf raises will ever fill space that simply doesn't exist in your blueprint.
Actually, scratch that. Here's a fact that might just ruin your day. Your abdominal blocks are completely predetermined. Whether you have a 4-pack, a 6-pack, or an 8-pack, that is dictated by tendinous intersections in your DNA. You cannot build an 8-pack if you only have a 4-pack in your genetic code. Period. Even 8-time Mr. Olympia Ronnie Coleman, arguably the most developed physique in human history, only had a 4-pack at his absolute leanest, simply because that is what his genetics gave him. Which naturally leads us to a pretty massive question. If our genetics set the absolute ceiling, what happens when nature's limits are completely removed? Like, what happens when you take the rarest genetic elite on the planet and introduce extreme chemistry and relentless volume? Section 3. Era of the Mass Monsters. Mutating the Blueprint. We're entering an era of absolute awe now, looking at bodybuilders who didn't just push the boundaries of human anatomy, they essentially erased them entirely. Let's trace how this happened. Back in the 1990s, Dorian Yates became the blueprint. Training in a dark, gritty dungeon gym in Birmingham, he showed the world a level of thickness and back detail that completely redefined what was physically possible. Then came the early 2000s with Jay Cutler. He introduced this crazy level of three-dimensional, topographical mass and density. I mean, his legs were so naturally huge he once had to stop training them just so his upper body could catch up. And then, by the mid-2000s, we arrived at Ronnie Coleman, the undisputed king of peak freakiness. The sheer surreal scale of these athletes is honestly hard to process. You had Big Rami, possessing 24-inch arms and legs that looked like a Belgian blue bull. You know, that breed of cattle with a mutation that literally blocks the body from limiting muscle growth. Then Marcus Rule. He was just pure visual aggression. His shoulders were so wide they made door frames irrelevant, basically ignoring every rule of how a human is supposed to be shaped. And Ronnie Coleman? He competed at 296 pounds, completely shredded, and trained exactly like a powerlifter, squatting and deadlifting 800 pounds. It was just this violent, unprecedented combination of volume, density, and conditioning. Yet despite all this massive size, greatness in this sport isn't always about pure mass. Ronnie Coleman himself looked at Flex Wheeler, a guy known for his aesthetic perfection, flawless balance, and complete proportions, and publicly called him the greatest bodybuilder I have ever seen. It really shows the deep respect for the art of the physique. But Flex Wheeler's story, just like so many others in this space, ultimately takes a tragic turn. And that perfectly sets up our final chapter. Section 4. Scandals and Tragedies. The Dark Depths. The tone of our explainer shifts heavily right here. We are now looking at the real-world consequences, the controversies, and the ultimate human costs of this sport, strictly based on documented facts. The controversies often begin right on the stage itself. In 1980, Arnold Schwarzenegger made a surprise return to the Mr. Olympia contest at 33 years old. Now, he was visibly off his peak condition, yet he won. To this day, it remains the only result in the sport's entire history where the winner was openly booed by the crowd and where the victory was treated as a legitimate scandal by almost everyone present. And off the stage, the sport has navigated some incredibly intense scandals and quiet erasures. In 1997, champion bodybuilder Bertil Fox was convicted of double murder in St. Kitts and sentenced to life in prison. The sport completely erased him from its history. Years earlier, in 1989, Bob Paris became the first professional bodybuilder to publicly come out as gay. With absolutely no official bans or rules cited, his sponsorships vanished overnight, and the sport's informal network effectively blacklisted him. More recently, the 2018 Mr. Olympia, Sean Roden, faced unresolved felony sexual assault charges. He became the only reigning champion in the 55-year history of the contest to be banned from defending his title without a trial, ultimately dying of a heart attack before his case ever even went to court. But perhaps the absolute darkest depths of the sport are found in the medical realities of pushing the human body way past its natural limits. Dallas McCarver collapsed and later died when he was just 26 years old. And while the official story cited choking, his autopsy reveals a much, much heavier truth. His heart weighed an astonishing 833 grams. That is nearly 3 times the size of a normal human heart, showing deterioration that would normally take decades and decades to accumulate. The documented medical failures are just devastating. Andreas Münzer erased the limits of conditioning using extreme diuretics and chemical protocols. He tragically died of systematic organ failure at just 31. Rich Piana built an entire massive brand on total transparency about his extreme chemical usage. His enlarged heart and damaged liver ultimately led to his death at 46.
And Flex Wheeler, the very man Ronnie Coleman called the greatest he had ever seen, suffered such severe circulatory and vascular damage that surgeons actually had to amputate his right leg when he was 54.
Which leaves us with this final, heavy thought. We've explored the gym myths that mislead us, the genetics that bind us, and the awe-inspiring heights of the mass monsters who mutated the human blueprint. But looking at these dark depths, the scandals, and the profound medical tragedies, we really have to ask, is the pursuit of the ultimate physical extreme truly worth the ultimate human price? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it's left you with a whole lot to think about.